Welcome to the second part of Brazil Climate Summit's first day. My name is Isadora Muscati, alumna of Columbia undergrad. I just want to share some quick reminders before we begin. First is that you have a QR code on your badges, and you can download our app using this QR code, and you will find there the schedule and sessions for the next day, and you can also connect to the audience and speakers. The event is live streamed on our website, so feel free to share with your friends and people that couldn't join us in person today. The event is fully booked, so we kindly ask you not to save seats in the auditorium, and seating will be on a first come, first served basis. So please take all your belongings with you during the breaks. And eating and drinking is not allowed inside the auditorium. There are live stream rooms on all floors where you can also grab a coffee and connect with your peers. And during each panel, you can submit questions for the speakers using the app. And please feel free to take pictures and share them on social media using hashtag BCS23. So for our next panel, we'll talk about another very relevant topic for Brazil, a promising and growing resource that has an important role in the transition to a net zero world, biofuels and biomass. As one of the world's leaders in the sector, Brazil stands in a unique position to collaborate with other countries, exploring scalable solutions and helping define standards and practices worldwide. Brazil is currently the largest producer and exporter of sugarcane-based ethanol, which has diverse applications across sectors, such as transportation, energy generation, and the production of sustainable aviation fuel, SAF. Despite the International Energy Agency predicting that by 2050, biofuels will contribute to around 27% of the global transportation fuel mix, many uncertainties remain. In this panel, we'll learn more about new technologies, policies, and geopolitical landscape. So it's my pleasure to introduce our mediator, Luisa Palacios, Senior Research Scholar at Columbia Center for Global Energy Policy and member of the Advisory Board of Brazil Climate Summit. And our speakers, Paula Kovarsky, Chief Strategy Officer at Raízen, Pedro Parente, former Chief of Staff of the Presidency of Brazil and founding partner of EB Capital, and Ricardo Assumpção, Latam, Sustainability and ESG Leader and Brazil Chief Sustainability Officer at EY.
Hello, everyone. I have to say that this is a phenomenal panel, so I'm very grateful to have Ricardo, Paula, and Pedro with us here. So I actually find it very interesting how we define this panel. How can they be part of the solution? Biomass and biofuel are today part of the solution. This is not a question mark. So this is about scaling. So when Isadora was talking about where the IEA sees biofuels in a net zero scenario, we are talking about that it represents right now like 5% of total transportation sector supply. We need to scale it so that it represents 25%. And so the same thing with biomass. Biomass has a role right now, and the question is, how do we scale it from 3% of total electricity production to 10% by 2050? So the question in this panel is not about how do we make, this is a new technology, how do we make it commercial? This is a commercial solution in the energy transition. The question is, how do we scale it? I cannot think of a better people to answer this question than the people that are accompanying me today. So I'm going to start with Ricardo, who's going to talk about this issue more on a global scale. So how do we look at biofuels and biomass as part of the energy transition?
So thank you very much, Luisa. Thanks for having me here today. Hello, everybody. So biofuels and biomass are one of the hot topics for us at UI globally. We believe that they are crucial, as you said, as you mentioned, for the energy transition and decarbonization. Just a few days ago, we saw at the G20 the launch of an alliance of biofuels led by Brazil, India, and US. So that shows the importance that we have and how we have to pay attention more closely to this problem. But to understand, in our opinion, the role that biofuels will play, we need to understand the challenges that we have from now to 2030. And we are facing today what we call the energy trilemma. So what is the energy trilemma? First is security. So how to meet demand with minimal supply disruption. We have to pay attention on that. The second one is equity. So how to have universal access to reliable and affordable energy. That's a second point to pay attention. The third one is, of course, the environment sustainability. The transition toward renewable and less carbon-intensive energy source. So to meet these three challenges, we see today, and UI predict that we have an alignment of force that will show us 5 mega trends that probably will be crucial to the next year and will accelerate the biofuel agenda. The first one is a massive redeployment of capital across different geographies. The second one is an unprecedented regulatory drive to support low-carbon technologies. The third is we will watch a balance between operational excellence and future growth. And the fourth is, as we were speaking before the panel, how that data emerging will be a new core asset to traceability and to monitor all the emissions through all value chains. And 5, we believe that the demand for new skills and different culture to succeed on this journey. So, of course, we will always speak and think about transportation, mobility, aviation when we speak about biofuels, but it's not just about that. It's about the opportunities go far beyond of that. Just one example that I like to mention is how biofuels will be a second life for refineries, for example. It's happening here in the US right now. So according to International Energy Agency, 50% of all refineries face the risk to lower your utilization or closure by 2030. So instead of closure, the capital could be repurposed to create long-term value with biodiesel, for example. And we can see this happening right now here. First, because it takes about just 18 months to transform a refinery to produce biodiesel instead of diesel, compared to more than 3 years in a greenfield operation. So this is happening right now here. And with the regulatory pressure on decarbonization, we see that biofuels are a viable pathway for emissions reduction across entire value chain. Scope 1, 2, and 3. Just a number here on biodiesel. So the diesel production carbon intensity is about 100 grams of CO2 equivalent for megajoules, compared to just 40 grams CO2 equivalent of megajoules with biofuels. And of course, for Brazil, we have to watch all the opportunities that we have in ethanol, biomethane, that I can speak a little bit more about that later, green hydrogen, and of course, SAF. SAF has gained momentum in 2022 and 2023 with increased production and introduction of meaningful incentives and mandates. The Inflation Reduction Act here in the US shows that this is a great opportunity to produce SAF. But Brazil has a unique opportunity to commercialize SAF via air jet fuel. And this is an opportunity that is because of our geography in Brazil. So this is a unique opportunity that we have. India has an opportunity as well, but Brazil has a great opportunity. And because of our energy matrix, it costs much less than other parts of the world to produce ethanol.
Thank you, Ricardo. Indeed, I am, those that have discussed with me about this, I believe that Brazil is an energy powerhouse. And as such, I actually use it a lot in my courses because it showcases one way in which emerging markets do energy transition. Because the energy transition is not a one-size-fits-all model. And so I find that the things that are happening are very interesting, particularly in the use of bioenergy. And so with us, we are going to have Paula, who's going to discuss biofuels in the context of transportation, and then Pedro is going to discuss bioenergy in the context of electricity, more likely. So why don't we start with you, Paula, and take us through the view of biofuels in Brazil and how they are part of the energy transition.
Yeah, so pleasure to be here. Thanks, Luciana. Thanks, everyone, for attending this great conversation, right? I'm a very enthusiastic of biofuels. And the very reason why I'm so enthusiastic is because in the very case of ethanol, we're talking about a solution that is something that is ready to go, that we are already using in Brazil, but also something that has a massive potential of contributing to the energy transition globally in the next 30, 40, 50 years. And this is essentially what we're working towards, and that's the core of Raízen's strategy today, which is to fully explore the potential of sugarcane. At this point in time, we only use 1/3 of the energy of sugarcane to produce what we know as first-generation ethanol and sugar. Just to give you a sense of how efficient this is, sugarcane production occupies only 1% of the Brazilian territory, but it produces, or it offers the country 20% of the energy matrix. And in the meantime, we produce half of the sugar global trade flow. So it's massive and it's efficient, and it doesn't even necessarily compete with food. But this is just the beginning. Our plan is we're already use the second third of the energy content of sugarcane to produce electricity through cogeneration. This is essentially why our ethanol is better than, for example, corn-based ethanol in terms of carbon emissions, because we use renewable energy to produce. And now we began already, but now we are scaling up the second or the third wave, which is we commit ourselves to produce second-generation ethanol, which is then 100% waste, and a product that we've been able to sell in Europe for more than twice the price of first-generation ethanol. One, because it's definitely a non-food thing, and two, because carbon emissions are even lower than the first-generation ethanol. And then from there, we are now expanding into vinasse, which is for every liter of ethanol that one produces, first and second generation, you produce 12 liters of vinasse, which through biodigestion, we're transforming into biogas to produce electricity, and then biomethane, that is a perfect substitute of natural gas. Then from biomethane, we can do green ammonia. We can do biomethanol. We can use, for instance, the carbon emission of the ethanol fermentation combined with green hydrogen and produce synthetic fuels like e-methanol. So there's a whole bunch of products that we can do out of the sugarcane. And in our view, those products are going to be key in cleaning up the global energy matrix and not only the local one, because there's a bunch of so-called hard-to-abate sectors in which electrification is not a solution, and therefore we will need the liquid one. And then SAF is probably the best example at this point. We see pretty strong conversion around the notion that there seems to be no electric or hydrogen solution for long-haul aviation until 2050, say. And then half of it is going to be biofuels. So a couple of numbers for you to get the order of magnitude of what I'm talking about. If we were to assume that 25% of the mandates of US and Europe for SAF in 2030 will be attended by ethanol or alcohol to jet, which is a technology that is already there, and between us, I think very quickly we'll be competitive with HEFA, which is the use of waste and used cook oil and animal fats. If we think about 25% only, this is about 9 billion liters of ethanol. This is a third of what Brazil produces. If we take this number to 2050, the 25% is going to be 100 billion liters. This is more than Brazil and US produce of ethanol together. And one still has to cope with the other 75% out of, how much more used cooked oil and how much more animal fats will be made available to do the maybe 10, 20%. There's still a 50 missing. So that's why we're so confident in saying that ethanol is a future solution today, because it's going to help Brazil, or will continue to support the Brazilian decarbonization in the light fleet today. But it's also a very important solution for the future of biofuels going forward.
I find this fascinating because Brazil has been using ethanol since the 1970s. The US as well, by the way, has been using ethanol for quite some time, for decades. And it started with an energy security solution. So the solutions of the past becoming the solutions of the future. But I think...
very same in Brazil. It was a security solution back in the day.
Exactly. But I think what has changed is the concept that it has to be sustainable. It has to be done in a sustainable way. And so it's not now just doing things that you have been doing, but how do you do them in a more sustainable way? And that's what you've been talking about. But now switching to biogas, which is a very interesting also application of bioenergy, we have Pedro to talk about the future and the outlook of biogas. And maybe if you could set the context of what we're talking about.
So thank you very much, Luisa, for the question. Thank you for the organization, Luciana, to invite me to be here, to be in this panel of so important issues. And I think that I would like to say that I would like to change this. No, not yet, please. Not yet. I'm doing it like Rod Stewart. Not yet. No, back. Thank you. I would like to change that interrogation mark for an exclamation mark, saying, yes, they are part of the solution. Biofuels, they are part of the solution. And I'm going to talk here about a specific case that we are investing. And remembering that we are a private equity company, we would not invest in something that we could not provide to our investors, let's say, a return that is compatible with the time that they lock their money. But this case here is related to biofuel coming from industrial waste, which is totally new in Brazil. In the case of Raízen, they use the biomass coming from the sugar cane, as Paula explained. But in Brazil, that is not the case of using industrial waste. And if you look at the situation in Europe, you have already almost 1,000 plants of waste of many different natures, but especially industrial. We see countries like Denmark, in which you have more than 25% of the natural gas being produced by renewable plants like the ones that we are talking about. Only France, is building more than 900 plants as well now. And here in the US, you have, huge investments from the government in this IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, as incentive, 30% of the capex up to can be deducted from the tax that companies are to pay. But I specifically like this case because it's not only a question to be a solution for the climate transition or energy transition and so on. But this is a solution for a very important problem that the agri-industries in Brazil, they face. What we do with our waste. And nowadays, what they do is they pay for landfills and composters to keep their waste. And they pay around $15 up to $30 per ton. and they are supposed to leave the waste there in the gate of these landfills and composters. So there is a direct impact in costs. I mean, what they pay to those entities to keep their waste, and as well the cost of the logistics. But that's not the only problem, and not the main problem. The main problem is the fact that, according to the Brazilian legislation, anyone that produces waste is responsible for the impacts in the environment, for the life of that waste. Doesn't matter if you pay someone to keep this. And the problem is it can reach the, let's say, the penal legislation, meaning that in your own life you can be jeopardized if you are manager of a company like that. So there's a huge problem. And what we are doing here is offering to these companies a solution that we will transform their waste totally in useful products. We are going to transform it in biomethane, carbonic gas, and fertilizers. Meaning that the problem disappears. They don't need to continue to be concerned about if these landfills and composters, they are dealing well with their products. Which is a reason for concern, because they are small firms. They are not very well-organized firms. But not only that, we are talking here about, a waste management solution. We are talking about circularity, because the waste produced by these industries, it started in the when you produce soybean corn and give the soybean and corn to the cattle or to the pigs or to the chicken, and then you have this industrial waste. So there's a very nice solution, really very nice solution. What is better about this solution, or is what is also very good about this solution, is the fact that Paula was mentioning the fact that they are not able to produce all over the year because they have seasonality in the crop of sugarcane. In this case, you can produce all over the year.
E2G produces all over the year, but yeah.
Do your commercials. So we can produce all over the year. Second, the location of the plant can be very close to the demand of the biogas. In our case, in our first plant, we will have to invest in a pipeline of 30, 40 kilometers only. Because location we can choose, as long as it's not farther than 50 kilometers from the source of the waste, 150 actually, we can locate the plant anywhere we want. So, of course, we can talk about the use of biomethane, but this is typically what I would like to bring here to show that it's not a solution for the general problem, but a very important solution for the companies, industries that produce this waste. They will get rid of their responsibility in relation to the environmental impacts.
So this is fascinating, because I know that you're looking at it from the point of view of helping companies deal with a specific issue, which is waste management. But landfills represent either the third or the fourth most important source of methane emissions in Latin America and worldwide. So you're actually dealing as well with a huge problem, which is methane, for which we have to deal with in the next years, just because it has 80 times, it's 80 times more powerful methane emissions than CO2 emissions in the environment. So this is, I find this like a really interesting way to not only solve something for the economy and for corporates, but also for the environment. So going back to you, Ricardo, now you're listening to two sectors, and you provided the context in which this global bioenergy works, how do you see the uses in Brazil of both biofuels and biomass, and what part of, how do they form or are part of the energy transition in Brazil?
First of all, I totally agree with Pedro when he says it's not a question mark. So biofuels, of course, is part of the solutions today and in the future. So it's important to understand that Brazil it's able to create technology with biofuels. So we can export technology, we can create innovation over that. So this is very important because sometimes Brazil, we follow the rules. So we import technology, and as Paula mentioned, we can create green technology here, Tupiniquim technology here. That's important. So, and show to the world that we know how to do that. In our case, EY here, Brazil, it's part of the solutions for clients globally, not only for clients in Brazil. And we are studying here how to use biofuel, how to use biomass in circular economy, for example. So SAF, of course, is our greatest opportunity to export to US because of the price. To produce here, it costs much less, as I mentioned before, because of the energy matrix. But we have to pay attention closely to for example, what is the intersection between SAF production or biofuels production and food systems and food productions? This is a question mark. Of course, today, and Paula, I know Paula has her opinion about that, but we have to pay attention. So how they will compete, or if they will compete in the future. What for us is, we don't have any doubts, is that biofuels is completely connected with circular economy. So we can solve problem, create biofuels. This is important. As Pedro mentioned, landfills is a problem. And we have a business case in Brazil, in São Paulo, with a water and sewage company that are transforming their sewage in biomethane, in biogas. This biogas can fuel all the fleet in a city of 30, in a city very close to São Paulo, of 300,000 people. Of course, not for everybody, but all the company fleet in the city. That shows that we can transform what it's potentially garbage and potentially will be for decades in a landfill, we can transform it into energy. So the point for us is how to help companies in Brazil to understand how to create long-term value with that. This is important. And after that, how to show to other countries or to US or to Europe that we can create innovation with biofuels in Brazil. So I think those are the main points, the main opportunities that we have to watch closely from now to 2030.
Thank you, Ricardo. So, Paula, I think, I don't know if everyone in the audience is as knowledgeable about you, about the decarbonization of the transportation sector, but just to get everyone on the same page, I think in the light-duty vehicles, which is the cars that we use, we normally think about electrification as the primary technology to decarbonize. The others are more of a question mark. Heavy-duty vehicles, which is just the trucks that are part of the commerce in any country, shipping, aviation. And so seems to be more of a consensus that biofuels has a very significant role, or is the primary technology or avenue for biofuels in going into 2050. So why don't we talk about what SAF is? And I think if you could bring the audience, what are we talking when we talk about SAF, which is Sustainable Aviation Fuels, and what is the role the biofuels can play?
Yeah, I think SAF is probably one of the best examples of the so-called hard to abate, right? I'm not sure any one of us would be willing to jump in a plane and be unsure about, charging somewhere up in the sky. So, and more so, if you think about the energy content of a kilogram of jet, the fuel for aviation today, one would need 20 times this in terms of the energy content of a battery. So, a bit of a joke, but it doesn't fly, right? I think it's going to be pretty hard. So biofuels are actually the solution. And I've seen many presentations from many different, consultants and companies and so on. And, without choosing one, we just collected them all and calculated the average. And there seems to be the case that biofuels will account for probably 50% of the demand for aviation fuel, at least in long haul by 2050. Right, so that's huge. That's amazing. And then the first technology that is already proven to produce SAF, the sustainable aviation fuel, is so-called HEFA, where you take animal fats and used cooked oil to produce SAF. I'll try to give you a simple explanation. Those are long carbon chain products. So you just reshuffle the carbon chain and produce the SAF, which is also a long carbon chain type fuel. The second technology in a row is going to be what we call the alcohol to jet. The challenge is that the ethanol supporting the alcohol to jet has a smaller carbon chain, so you have to combine chains and produce the larger chain for SAF. But we are very confident that we are very close to industrial capacity in the alcohol to jet. And then someone mentioned, not sure if it was you or Ricardo in the beginning, that it's not enough to be renewable. It has to be sustainable, and it has to be traceable. Think about, that's why I like the airplane example. Think about an airplane. Think about the insurance company that deals with the airplane. They will be willing to know where exactly this fuel was produced. Which farm did it come from? Which landfill did it come from? Which used cooked oil? How many McDonald's will be needed to, for so much used cooked oil to be made available to comply with such a demand? And that's why we're so confident that in the very case of ethanol, this is, easy and scalable. And then again, another interesting thing about the aviation is that this is fundamentally global. So for example, if you think about the visiting business in Brazil, visiting is international airlines that come to Brazil and have to refuel to come back home. So we're talking about, give or take, 2 billion liters. So those companies could supply their tanks with 100% of SAF produced in Brazil, with the advantage that you need 1.7 liters of ethanol to do 1 liter of SAF, so that's very efficient. And they could arguably use 100% of jet fuel in Europe and do the book and claim. So you don't even need to transport the fuel. You can do the carbon compensation. So this is also very efficient. And last but not least, the question I get when I talk about SAF is, okay, but it's 3-4 times more expensive than jet. That's always the question that comes to mind. To be honest, I'm not an expert in airplanes, but I tell you what, if you have to change the entire airplane fleet, it's going to be way more expensive. And that's probably the most fundamental advantage of what we're talking about here, be it biofuels, be it the biogas from waste. All of those products are what we call drop-in products. So they can be blended to fossil fuel products. You don't need to necessarily invest in the infrastructure, and they are ready to go. And so, it sounds pretty obvious, but the world usually has those kind of pendular moves, right? So at the first moment, people said, oh, we're going to electrify the world, then, well, maybe it won't be possible. Biofuels have a role. Then the debate against fuel comes in. In the very case of sugar, I would argue. In the case of second-generation ethanol, there's definitely not an issue, nor in the case of biogas. So that's definitely a solution that the world should embrace.
You bring a really very important point, which is that is the life cycle of each asset. So, maybe a car is 5, 6 years. I mean, we're talking planes, ships, and these are very long cycle
30-year.
30-year assets. And so how do you decarbonize them in the meantime? Because the replacement is going to take place in 20 years. So you need to do something now. And this is a solution, maybe not perfect, but it's a solution for now. And I like the idea that sometimes you need to buy yourself some time. And the issue is not 2050. It's what do you do today, tomorrow, because you have a carbon budget. And so I like that idea because it is about not changing all of the infrastructure that's going to happen in time, but all of these are solutions with existing infrastructure. Going then to biogas, how important of a solution this could be for Brazil?
Well, I'm going to show kind of a dream here, because it can be really very, very important, can be a revolution in terms of the use of renewable fuels in the interior of the country of Brazil. So now is the time of my slide. Thank you. Okay. So we have here 3 maps of Brazil, and I try to represent in the map 3 aspects of this discussion. On the left-hand side, we have the natural gas infrastructure, the pipelines. And you see that they are only in the coast of Brazil, with the exception of the pipeline that comes from Bolivia, and the gas from Bolivia is declining. So you see that availability of the natural gas, although it's fossil, but availability of the natural gas is only in the coast of the country. In the middle, you see the infrastructure for the liquid gas coming from petroleum. And you see that this is all over the country. What does that mean? I mean that the cities that in the interior of the country, they have only the opportunity to consume this fossil fuel. Well, but then let's go to the right side. Right side, you see the number of slaughtering houses all over the country. Slaughtering houses produce industrial waste, and industrial waste can be transformed into biogas. So we have here, as long as, of course, we need investment, but we are on there, we have here a perfect match between producers of industrial waste and the market for this gas. Being able to supply, to offer in the cities of the interior of the country the availability of a renewable and very good fuel for their consumption. Remembering that we have in the interior of the country, in cities, for instance, in Mato Grosso do Sul, big slaughterhouse. And I was the CEO of BRF, and BRF have very important plants in Lucas do Rio Verde in Goiás. I mean, a lot of plants. So this is the aspect that I really think it's important to show that it's not only, I mean, the fact that we are able to produce a renewable fuel, but we can be able as well to bring this solution for the interior of the country, which otherwise, due to the lack of pipelines, they cannot be served. Yeah,
maybe adding to your point, the countryside is where the Brazilian agribusiness powerhouse is, right? And Brazil imports like 94% of the fertilizers, be it a third NPK, right? The reason why Brazil is not a big producer of fertilizers is because natural gas has always been an expensive feedstock. I mean, for example, a company producing ammonia in Brazil could shift into green ammonia by shifting from natural gas into biomethane. So that's another very interesting element in which we could be producing green fertilizers in a space where Brazil is actually an importer. And in the case of Raízen, for instance, the green fertilizer will reduce further the carbon footprint of the ethanol, because this is, probably one of the best examples of circularity, alluding to your point.
So I think when we look at how much the energy transition is going to cost, and I like a lot the Luciana from BNDES in one of the panels worth mentioning, we don't have the balance sheets that advanced economies have. So how do we think strategically? How do we think smart about how do we use our capital? This seems to me, and Marcos in the agricultural panel, you were also talking about fertilizer. So if you're importing 90% of your fertilizers and you can produce it at home in a much cheaper way, because 60% of what you're importing from Russia and Belarus, and this is oil. And so this seems like a very obvious one, right? From the point of view of also greening your agricultural sector, the fertilizers that you use. That goes into your point about traceability, innovation. And so with that, 5 minutes left. And so you have 5 minutes for your lasting thoughts to the audience. Let's start with you, Ricardo.
I have a point here. So Brazil is maybe, we have great assets, natural assets, sustainability assets that we need to combine to create value. So biofuels is one of them. Maybe the question mark is not if is the solution, but how to combine that with all the other natural assets that we have here. So the energy transition will cost about $8 trillion each year by 2030. So we have the solution, or part of the solution is in Brazil. So not only with biofuels, but with our energy matrix, with our biodiversity. So how to create value with all of that? I think we need to think further, because I don't think that we are doing a great job in create value with our combined assets. Individually, yes. Great examples, great business case. So how to show that Brazil can export all of that? And to close, and to pass to Paula. Carbon today, it costs zero in the balance sheets. In the near future, it will not be like this.
Thank you. Paula, lasting thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would point to three things. First thing is, traceability, reliability of the carbon solution that we are developing so that we can sell it to the world. Like it or not, carbon is worth a lot more here and in Europe than it is in Latin America. So, we can capture a lot of value and a lot of money to countries that, definitely need this money. So we need to be able to prove that this is, kosher, well done, well traced, certified, and so on and so forth. So this is number one. Number two, I would dare to argue technology is not an issue in this case. We have a particular situation where we developed the technology, second generation technology. Raízen has the only plant at industrial scale working, whereas the US probably lost billions and billions of dollars trying to do so. But that being said, again, I think the scarcity value is actually in the feedstock. And we are very rich in case of feedstock. And so this is another very important element to it. And then the third is, we need the right policies indeed in Brazil. We need to make sure we don't go against the global trend. So we treat carbon properly. We treat, good agriculture properly. We value those things that we have in our country. And because if we don't do it, the others won't value, right? So to me, it's a matter of making sure we value properly and we create the rules and the regulatory framework to be recognized and educate the global north about this potential.
So I will be very brief here. First of all, I think that's a very good moment to be in Brazil. I mean, because really, I think that the question was totally answered here. Yes, we are part of the solution, not part of the problem. And that's something that, unfortunately, we have been worked very badly up to next year. So the other aspect I would like to mention is that it's perfectly possible to combine investment in a very attractive return and provide for solutions very important for the country. And we'd really like to do that. Thank you.
Well, please join me in thanking this fantastic panel. That's been great.